Association and to the Republican National Committee. Warning, some profanity is used. To whom it may concern. Hey! Assholes! Yes, I know. I'm supposed to wait a week before politicizing gun control. Well, unless I'm an evangelical minister who wants to say that the cause of gun violence is not enough prayer in school, then I don't have to wait 2 hours before voicing the opinion that what I think we need to do is force my religion on other people by praying in school more. But since I'm not an evangelical minister, and I personally don't think that prayer is the answer to all our problems, I'm supposed to wait 7 days out of respect for the dead, which is a real fucking problem because thanks to the NRA, we've had 18 mass shootings in the last 45 days. So if I don't violate your little fucking safe space by opening my mouth in the first 48 hours, I don't get to voice my opinion at all. And yeah, you heard me right. All of this, the deaths, the violence, the butchery, is solely the fault of the fucking NRA, an organization whose sole purpose is to subvert democracy by putting the interests of a tiny but wealthy minority ahead of the general fucking population, the vast majority of whom wants some form of gun control, by bribing public officials with millions in campaign donations or in-kind spending or support. Yeah, you heard me. I said fucking bribe. I don't give a shit that it's legal. When Senator Marco Rubio receives $3.3 million from the NRA, they don't make those donations anonymously. Think he doesn't know where that money comes from? Or Burr? Or Blunt? Charlton Heston, William Conant-Church, and Wayne LaPierre, they're all guilty of negligent homicide. Yeah, I said it. And if LaPierre wants to sue me for that, great. That's a discussion we need to have in a public forum. Let's talk about just how much you get to close your eyes to all the harm you're fucking doing before someone gets to call bullshit on you. And yeah, you know what? You're right. The only thing that stops a bad guy with a gun is a good guy with a gun. I completely agree with you on that. Congratulations, you found an argument that works. The thing is, what you're completely and deliberately ignoring is that rather than taking your good guy with a gun and blowing away a mass shooter after he's already killed 6 people, maybe you could stop him from getting the gun in the first fucking place. And yeah, I see that little hamster wheel spinning. You're sitting there saying, we'll never stop all the bad guys from getting guns. You think we're too stupid to do it. You think we're too violent to do it. You think we're too psychopathic to do it. So I have to sit here and ask you, why do you hate America? Why do you hate America? Why do you sit here and say we're going to fail when every other country that's tried it has managed to pull it off? Gun control works. It fucking works. It fucking works. Everybody knows it fucking works. Every industrialized nation that's committed itself to gun control has gotten it to work. In the 18 years before Port Arthur, Australia had at least 13 mass shootings. They enacted gun control, and in the 12 years since, Australia has had zero, none, nada, not a single mass shooting. Think that's because the only thing that stops a bad guy with a gun is a good guy with a gun? Or think that's because it works? And they say, oh, well, gee, that's Australia. Doesn't mean it's going to work here. That, hey, just because it works in every single one of the other 38 industrialized countries that have tried it, I'm nonetheless completely off my rocker for the insane suggestion that that's somehow evidence that it might actually work here too. Well, how many then? It works in the UK, it works in France, it works in Germany, it works in Spain, it works in Canada, it works in Australia. How many countries does it need to work in before you say, hey, Gee, maybe it'll work in the United States. There isn't a single industrialized country where gun control has failed to work. In fact, you know it would work here. How do I know you know? Because you aggressively block any legislation that would fund research into the causes of gun violence in this country. Every time the FBI wants permission to track guns used in crimes, you 86 the bill. Every time the CDC wants to study gun deaths, one of the leading causes of death in this country, you fuckers make it illegal for them to collect the data or publish the results. Well, for a group of people who say, gee, it's not going to work here, seems to me really fucking clear that you know it's going to work and you'll do anything you can to keep that information out of the hands of other people. Do you want to know the real difference between us and the other 38 countries that have managed to get gun control to work? It's you. It's the NRA and Republican congressmen who are allowing themselves to be bought off. Oh, what? Because it's impossible to guarantee that a single bad guy won't get a gun, we should just arm everybody instead? Okay, fine, but while you're doing that, you're guaranteeing that every bad guy who wants a gun can get one. That's like saying, hey, we'll never stop every single possible act of terrorism, so why bother even having a Department of Homeland Security? Yes, heroin does fall into the wrong hands. Doesn't mean you don't have a vice squad. Yes, people break into houses. Doesn't mean you don't have alarm systems. No system is perfect, and if you're looking for a perfect system, you might as well give up the entire game because you're not going to find one. What I'm looking for is a better system. Something that stops the slaughter. Something that puts us on par with the rest of the world. Japan had less than 1 gun death per million people last year. The United States had 112. You see those kind of numbers in Uruguay, Panama, the Philippines, Montenegro. Heck, even with all the gang violence, you're less likely to get shot if you live in Mexico. But you want your guns, and so you deliberately make perfection the enemy of progress, and consequences be damned. What, we landed a man on the moon but we can't get the guns off the streets? Are you fucking shitting me? How much crystal meth do you have to be smoking to make that argument to me with a straight face? And Sean Hannity. This guy is to integrity in journalism what Kanye West is to integrity in journalism. Did you see him talking about the Las Vegas shooting? He gave away the ballgame. It's not about a good guy with a gun stopping a bad guy with a gun. Nobody cares about that. What they're fantasizing about, what they really want to do, is to be vigilantes. They're fantasizing about being the good guy themselves. It's the sense of empowerment. Sean Hannity is talking about himself in the third person saying, well, what happens when Sean Hannity is there with a gun and sees an opportunity? The guy's in between clips, and Sean Hannity gets to take him out. Holy shit! I haven't seen a peacock get puffed up like that since Bob the Drag Queen killed it on RuPaul's Drag Race. Who the hell does he think he is? Dirty Sean? Bat Hannity? And in 30 seconds of national airtime, he highlighted the exact problem with gun rights advocates in this country. They fetishize guns. They worship guns. They make guns part of some fantasy they get to live out where they're the ones responsible for their families, for their towns, cities, states. Not the government, not the police. Them, holding off the barbarian hordes with their gun. And they don't let a little thing like reality interfere with this fantasy. Even Sean Hannity, who had such a hard-on that Habitat for Humanity could rebuild an entire African village just from the wood in his pants, had to admit that even he could only have gotten a round off if the shooter hadn't have been 32 stories up and 400 feet away. Not to mention, he'd have to wait till the shooter was reloading, and good luck with that one since the NRA is pushing for larger clip sizes. But hey, it's a mental health issue, which, for Republicans, of course, is completely contingent on who's pulling the trigger and who's getting shot. I mean, when a black man shoots another black man, well, hey, that's just life. It happens. But when it's a white man shooting up a school, oh, he's a unique individual with a complex background, rich emotional history, and someone who is well-liked by his neighbors. He just snapped from the pressure of a world that was being unfair to him. What with the war on Christmas, immigrants taking his job, uppity women demanding consent for sexual activities, and skyrocketing insurance rates as a result of stronger storms, rising tides, and more severe weather caused by a global conspiracy started by the Chinese. Yeah, when a black or brown guy shoots up a club, it's an act of terrorism. When a white guy does it, it's a mental health issue. Ann Coulter even doubled down on this, saying that guns don't kill people, the mentally ill do. I've got to say, I hope she never needs a heart transplant. A lab rat is the only creature with a heart small enough to fit, but frankly, I don't know any willing to do it, and there's some things that even a lab rat shouldn't have to do. A mental health issue? A fucking mental health issue? Are you fucking out of your goddamn mind?
Hello, everyone, and welcome to In Time. Thank you very much for joining us. My name is Nicholas Lamar Soutter, and I am here, as always, with my favorite hat and his trusty sidekick, Ansgar Odinson.
Hey, how's it going, everybody?
And yeah, I guess what, like 4 or 5, no, right before the primaries, I did a rant on Donald Trump. I have a book. It sold 5,000 copies in a year with lots of marketing, all this other stuff. This rant did 5,000 shares in like 2 days. Everyone kept saying, Nick, you should just be doing these rants. And eventually I did one on gun control, and that's what you guys heard. If you're interested in the rest of that rant, it is uh, linked in the description, but that is my rant on gun control. And I have one other on Donald Trump. It was made if you look into that one. I think Ansgar, you were a fan of that one.
Yeah, I was.
That one is, let's see, that rant was from right before or right after Donald Trump said we should start murdering the families of terrorists.
Oh, I
So today
remember
we
that
are,
one. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, and that helps you understand the nature of it. When he said that, I was like, okay, I think I have a few things to say, which is pretty funny because I'm usually known as the civil guy, and those rants are admittedly a little off-brand, but hey. Uh, I'm also apparently a shill, I just learned, which is okay. I've been called one before by the flat
Yeah.
earthers, so I'm used to that. Our topic today is gun control in America, and I think we all have a number of things to say. I think Ansgar and I are going to have some difference of opinion. I think this is going to be a topic that we really do want to hear from the audience from. We will absolutely be diving into the chats as much as possible. I've already seen a few things just now that I want to address. We also are taking super chats. We are not live through the YouTube method for super chatting, but if you look at the our uh, description, you'll find a link to the super chat. And I'm sorry, I just realized we are simulcasting, and the link for the super chats is not on the GDC. It is on our In Time channel. Oversight on my part. I will have to remember to update the GDC with our description and information. I don't think they have the link to my channel or that rant either, but I'm easy enough to find. I think there was one other thing I'd wanted to say, but I got distracted. I keep somebody in one of the chats seems to think two things. One, that I'm Jewish, and two, that it matters for some reason. And if there's a reason, I don't know what it is. Am I missing something?
Well, maybe this person subscribes to the belief. Now, I've heard this one that
Okay.
that things like human rights were invented by a vast Jewish cabal to help take over the world. I don't know.
Oh, okay.
Just
Oh, well,
maybe.
that's good. That's good to know. Yeah,
Okay, cool.
Souter is a traditional Jewish name. Obviously.
Yes,
So is
yes.
Nicholas. Yeah, it's the Gospel of Nicholas was unfortunately removed from the Bible. My people are still really, it was in the Old Testament. My people are still really upset about it, and it's a touchy subject. So I don't like I don't like that he's going there.
Yeah.
It was a good gospel. There was a lot of sex and rape and pillaging, so it was pretty much like every other gospel of the Bible. I say gospel, I'm sorry, I didn't mean gospel, but at any rate. So I think we should cover a few stats about gun violence in the United States. First of all, we have, as of this moment, on average, about 40,000 gun deaths in the US. About two-thirds of those are death by suicide, which is important and relevant, and I'm sure we will discuss, but I don't think necessarily has the mitigating factor that a number of people seem to think, and that we've already seen in the live. This is already moving, as seen in the live chat, but we also, let's see, oh, sorry, 40,000 deaths in the US, and I moved all my charts because I am
Oops.
disorganized and I
While you're
know
finding
exactly right.
while you're
Well,
finding those,
I could say what two or three more things off the
okay.
top of my head. Gun violence is, if I recall, the seventh leading cause of death in the U.S. It is, I do recall for certain, it is the second leading cause of death for teenagers and children. Second to car crashes. Car crashes are still number one, but they used to be threefold before we put in car seats and started having some significant regulations regarding putting children in the front where there are airbags. After we finally installed airbags and a number of things. And accidental deaths, you know what? I'm going to get the accidental death numbers in a minute. So yes, Ansgar,
I
what
would
were
like
you
to
going to say
say,
before? Yeah.
too, that I'd like to point out that actually it is looking like Donald Trump may end up being the most anti-gun president we've ever had.
I think there's definitely some. Well, and he came out and said he came out and said to the gun lobby, I think we really have to look at regulating guns much more. And then I think somebody corrected him because he walked that back significantly.
Whoa, whoa, whoa,
But he
no,
has,
he walked it forward. He said that he is all for this. Was in a room with lawmakers. Said that
yes, I
he is
remember.
all for taking the guns first, due
Yes,
process
yes,
after, and now
yes.
he is pushing forward red flag laws.
Okay, I hadn't heard about the red flag logs, and I think that's important, and I'd like to get into that.
Yep.
I'm thinking the same one you are, but what I mean is after he said, so yeah, he said it, and then 2 minutes later, he doubled down on it, but about 2 or 3 hours after the meeting, he walked it back.
But now
And
he's
then the
actually
next day, he
pushing
walked
through
it
the
back for
very thing he said he wanted to do.
Did you vote for Trump? Are
No, I
you a
did
Trump
not.
voter? I'm not sure I believe you anymore. I'm starting to think you're a Trump supporter. The other couple of stats I wanted to access to guns increases the likelihood of suicide by 3 times. And that's an important figure because while admittedly, if you take away all the guns, you're not going to end suicide. Having a gun increases the risk of suicide threefold. And the reason is because most people actually experience some form of suicidal ideation at some point in their lives. It's usually reasonably brief. People get very upset, they get distraught. If there is an easy and quick and painless way to do it immediately, they may do it, where if it's something they had to take even 2 or 3 minutes to think about and engage in some way, they wouldn't. Again, doesn't mean necessarily all towards one side or another, but if there is a gun in the house, you are 3 times more likely to commit suicide. 1 million women alive today have been shot or shot at by an intimate partner. Women in the US are 21 more times likely to be killed with a gun than women in any other, what they call in this study, high income countries. For the most part, I refer to roughly the same category as industrialized nations, of which there are 38. Let's see. Also in the US, rate, and this is an interesting one, is 25 times that.
Your camera
Uh,
has
uh,
just gone black.
oh, oh, that's a good. I wonder what caused that. I'm not sure that that's on my end. I think I'm going to blame you because I still see.
I'm going
Um,
to try and refresh the browser, but
all
no
right.
promises. All right, I have you back.
All right, perfect. I do not see you yet, but I'll keep going.
Yeah, go ahead. Keep going.
So let's see. Stats. I was at stats, which everybody loves. Stats. Everybody loves numbers, I'm sure. In the U.S., this is the other thing. One argument I hear a lot, and I'd like to address this specifically. I've already heard it like twice in the chat already. Well, gee, we're not for gun control, or at least I'm not for gun control. I am for guns being in the hands of certain people. No, I'm against police having guns. I really am. I don't want police to have guns, and I think most black men in this country don't want police to have guns either. And in fact, the homicide rate by a police officer or the accidental, homicide. Yeah, well, I don't know what you call it, but the killing of an unarmed civilian in this country is significantly higher than in any other country in the world. It's because the police are armed. I do believe that the police have to be armed right now because we in this country are very fond of arming our criminals. And so if you're going to ensure that every criminal who wants a gun can have one, which is currently what our policy is, I think you have to arm the police. But that's the only reason I don't want them. And they are other countries, the UK, Japan, where the police are not armed. Robin Williams did that great joke where in the UK they don't have a gun, so basically they say stop, or I'll say stop again, and I'm cool with that. And I think again, most black men and women in this country would actually prefer that. I would prefer that. So, but we'll get into that a bit more. But I think hopefully that gives a good. Oh yes, and we as a country, the top 10 gun-owning countries is the U.S. with 120 guns per 100 residents. That means for every 100 people, we have 120 guns. We have more guns than we do people in this country. The next highest is Yemen with 52 per 100 people. The next highest below that is Serbia with 40. Montenegro is also 40. Below that is Uruguay. And finally, we get to Canada, which is the next highest industrialized nation, which has 34, which is about 1/5 the number we do. And that's the next highest for industrialized countries. So I am pretty much for much stricter gun control. I think it's worked repeatedly. I think it's been proven to work, and I don't think we really need guns. Ansgar, I know you have a much more nuanced position.
I do.
So could you explain it to everyone?
Sure. I think I want to start, though, where we both agree. I think we both agree that there is a problem with gun violence in our country. I think
Yes.
we both agree that we want to keep the guns out of the hands of the people that will do horrible things with them, whoever those people may be. I think that we both want to make sure that children don't have access to guns. So,
A very controversial policy, but I agree. I think I
yes,
can sign on
yes.
with that one.
So I think those are the major goals, right?
Yep.
Your position is to take the guns away pretty much entirely.
Yes, sir.
Mine definitely is more nuanced. But before I get into that, I do want to ask you a question. Do you
Sure.
honestly believe that our country is in a place that fascism could actually take over?
I think it depends on how you define is it in a place.
How about this?
I
Do you think it's a
well,
likely scenario if we did the wrong, if we don't make the right moves politically as a nation, socially as a nation? Do you think that fascism could actually take root in this country? That we could end up with a truly fascist dictatorship in this country?
I think it is possible that that could happen in any country. I think for the
Hmm.
most part, this country has more protections against it than most. But yes, it could happen here. I think it is happening here now more than at any time that I'm really aware
Right.
of in history. I do not think we are to the point where I think we have to be vigilant, but I think we always have to be vigilant.
Hmm.
And I think we've been failing that. If we do what we're supposed to be doing, which is to be an engaged electorate, and we're not, so we're not doing that. So
Right.
admittedly, this is hypothetical, but if we were doing really what we're supposed to be doing, I'm not very worried for the near future, which includes the next 10 to
Right.
25 years. So in that sense, no, I don't think it's a very strong
But
likelihood. Is it
but not right away. But
is it a strong likelihood over the next 100 years? I think it becomes harder to predict. I think for the most part, there are very few outside of Germany,
Mhm.
which I'm more than happy to discuss. And a few people, of course, have already brought that up, which they
Right.
should. Outside of that, there isn't much precedent for that kind of thing happening, and I'm
Mhm.
not sure that guns would have helped in the way that people think in that situation. But the answer is, I see it as a possibility, but a rather remote one.
Well, first of all, I would definitely say that guns help to a degree. If you
Hmm.
look at, let's just say, let's take for instance Norway as an example.
Yes.
Their resistance, may not have overturned, German occupation, but just merely them being able to put up a resistance, to put up a guerrilla force, may have actually there's actually an argument for them having stopped the Germans from developing the nuclear bomb before us.
I really like that argument. I like that argument a lot. That's actually the kind of argument I really love. It's a deterministic argument. So the
Mhm.
one very small fact, and it reminds me of the other thing that saved us from getting wiped out in World War II. We should all be speaking um, uh, German, but for I'm gonna look up the name of the guy so I get it right. So if you don't, why don't you continue for like one more minute, and
Yeah.
I'm gonna interrupt and
So
backtrack a
so
sec.
so I wanted to get into how I really think about this. So I don't think that we need to get rid of guns. What I think we need are stronger laws, and stronger regulations and more universal regulations. And what I say about that is, first of all, there are too many times when people slip through the cracks that shouldn't have. As an example, um, not long ago there was a shooting, and we're talking about it. This was an ex-military guy, and his guns were registered and they were legal. However, he had had a long history of mental illness and depression, and there was a court order to take his gun licenses and that he should
Mhm.
not be armed, but he slipped through the cracks. He slipped through the system because we don't have a real national system for keeping track of this stuff, right? We
Yep.
don't have a way of ensuring people aren't slipping through the cracks. You just kind of sign an order and hope everything goes well,
Yep.
and it hardly ever does. So that's one area of problem. The next area of problem is that our gun licensing is very, very weak and varies from state to state. And so here's what I'm proposing.
Yes.
Imagine if we had a gun licensing system that worked like this. Anybody, you, me, we've never handled a gun before, so we want to get a gun license. What do? We go to a place, we take a written, just like a car, we take a written test and we take an actual shooting test at a range, right? And
Yep.
what that does is that allows us, with our very first license, to be able to own something like a single shot hunting rifle. We're talking
Yep.
about statistically the least dangerous weapon that there is, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now, you can't even apply for the next variant of the license, the upgraded license to own a more statistically dangerous weapon, until you've shown that you have had and the amount of time is debatable. We might look at it, we would have to look at the stats and go, maybe it's 6 months, maybe it's a year, maybe it's longer. But what happens is, after you've had a certain amount of time with no points on your license for any kind of a reckless behavior, any kind of accidents, no even if your gun wasn't locked up and it was stolen and used in a crime, that counts against you because you didn't have it properly
Yep.
locked.
Yep.
Once you've proven a track record of safe, sane, reasonable gun ownership, then you can apply and take your test to expand your license to things like handguns, right?
Mm-hmm.
Then, once again, we just keep doing it. We follow this track because, to be quite honest, somebody. I mean, it happens now and again. Obviously, the Vegas shooter is an example of this. But these things are rare. You rarely find someone who has been a legal, safe gun owner for 15, 20 years, 30 years, who suddenly takes their prized possession off the wall and goes on a shooting spree. That generally doesn't happen.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so, and we're never going to prevent all murder and all mass killings and things like that. People will find ways, but we can limit them without completely restricting freedom, and while still sending the message to our government that should they become tyrannical, there is a chance at the population being able to defend themselves, even if it's as simple as a resistance, you know what I mean, to be a pain in the ass.
Yep. Yep.
You
Yep.
know?
Yep. Okay. A lot to unpack there. So
Yes,
I'm going
there
to try to
is.
hit a number of points. I think there's those are just some spectacular points. I would like to find a way to strawman you and make you look like a complete idiot, but you didn't leave me with a lot to work with there. So I'm going to have to probably treat that reasonably honestly, because I think those are some very good points. I do think, in terms of, I think most people who are pro Second Amendment are going to see almost no difference between you and I. I mean, almost no difference.
That's
Because a
very
lot of
true.
them,
We're both pro gun control. We're just debating on how much at this point.
yeah, I think that's important. I think you're right, and I think that's an important distinction to make, because I think, and especially we do have some Second Amendment people in the audience who are going to sit there and say, "Look, you can't even license the guns," and I've gotten into that. Just before we go, I am the owner and operator of the Humanist Codex, which is a anti-theist site, and a humanist outreach site to religious people who are struggling with deconversion, people who want to understand some of the philosophical arguments. But on the day that I bought that site, I bought two domain names, the atheistcodex.com and the guncontrolcodex.com, because gun control was one of the arguments that I was working on, and I really knew like the back of my hand, and had what I thought was sort of a new, unique angle to it. And I debated that for about 6 months straight. So it's a topic that fascinates me, and I still have that domain. And I think there's a lot to unpack in ways that I'd like to to bring it down. And some of those arguments that I think I'd like to try to employ here, but I'd also like to get on where you and I agree and start dissecting some of I think what would be our mutual objections to the Second Amendment. But to get back to one of the first things you said about the fact that Norway may have stopped Germany from developing a nuclear weapon by slowing them down enough. And I'm curious if that may have also delayed their entry into the Soviet Union, which by delaying that even by a month is a huge turnout for what happened. But there's the funny thing is I used to study, and I'm a big fan of how history can turn on a dime and how just extraordinarily small acts that seem insignificant can completely rewrite history. Now, so the one I was looking for was Giuseppe Zangara. Giuseppe Zangara was an assassin who murdered the mayor of Chicago in, I think it was 1933. He assassinated the mayor of Chicago with a gun. And the reason we did not lose World War II is because when he did this, he did it on a wobbly chair. He stood up on a chair. There were many chairs to choose from. This was actually an event, a political rally, and he chose the nearest chair he could. And just because of the way the chairs had been laid out, the one that he chose was off kilter. And when he shot, he assassinated the mayor of Chicago. The reason that's important is because the mayor of Chicago was not his target. His target was Franklin Delano Roosevelt, at the time President-elect Franklin Delano Roosevelt, who was instrumental in pushing the New Deal through Congress at that point and vowed to sign the New Deal, or what would eventually become the New Deal, when he became president. Now, at that time, you may recall, whoever won the election became president, and whoever came in second place became the vice president. And that caused a very serious problem because now you had a president who would be of one party and a vice president who would be of the exact opposite party, which also incentivized murdering the president so that you could get your vice president if that's who you wanted. And it led to paralysis because the two were working against each other. The vice president was staunchly against that package. That package is arguably the number one reason we were able to recover from the recession. It was our ability to have recovered from the recession that allowed us to recover from the Japanese bombing of Pearl Harbor and to actually re-engage on the Pacific front. If we had been delayed by any significant margin, we probably would not have been able to enter the war when we did. And there's a very good likelihood that Hitler would have been able to complete his campaign against England and conquered all of Europe. And then we would have been waging a war on the US front, both against the Japanese and the Germans, and probably would have lost. So why did we win the war? Because somebody stuck a wobbly chair in the right spot for one instance. Now, I use that example because actually, if you study history, what I think you'll find is 99% of history are situations like that. If you take a look at, and there are situations like that everywhere if you're looking for them. Just the turn on something that small, which is why, and I think sometimes, I think you could sit there and say, hey, it's arguable that Hitler getting slowed down in Norway is what cost him the war. And there's 30 things, or there's a million things that would have cost him the war. And that's why I buy that argument.
I kind of tried to keep it contained to, they specifically were trying to do this, and they succeeded, you know?
Yeah. And that makes a lot of sense to me. So that's why I buy that argument, where I think a lot of people might not, because there's a whole, no, that argument makes a lot of sense to me. But there's a couple things. First of all, they didn't have a significant military, and to this day still don't. They actually have a militia. So does Sweden, so the Scandinavian countries. They have a militia. And in fact, if you consider the militia as a standing army, they have more soldiers guarding their homeland per square mile by a factor of about 100 than we do. You don't want to invade those countries. Now, if we wanted to switch to a militia system, I think that would make a lot more sense. But right now, we don't have that system. So I do think there is some comparing of apples and oranges, because they have to do that. And they have very strict procedures in place for what they do. And I made this argument before. I actually would be closer to your point of view if I thought that people who are pro-Second Amendment were arguing honestly on this issue. I'm most of the time convinced that they're not, and here's why. When we talk about the Second Amendment, they say, okay, the right to bear arms, the right by people to bear arms shall not be infringed. I've never met anyone who knows what a right is. I've never met anyone who knows what a right is. I've never met anyone who knows what a person is. I've never met anyone who knows what an arm is. I've met a lot of people who say they know, and most of them agree. Even within the NRA, most people don't agree on most of those terms. But to start with right and infringement, frankly, paying for a gun is an infringement. If you have to pay $2 for a gun, that's an infringement, and that's a violation of. We don't think you should have to pay to vote, and we know voting's a right.
Right.
So I tell gun owners, I say, listen, I would be, and I mean it when I say this, I would probably be for giving every American citizen free of charge a semi-automatic rifle convertible to fully automatic, ammo to use it, and all that. I would be for the government paying for that and giving it to every American citizen, so long as we did it the way it's done in Norway or Sweden or one of those countries. And they sit there and say, oh, great, well, there's no gun control over there, so let's do. There is phenomenal gun control over there. And what I sit there and say is, well, okay, yeah, if you're really for your guns, and if you're really responsible like you say you are, you brought up an excellent point, and I think this is a great point. If somebody takes your gun and commits a crime, in the US, we've made it so that you're not held accountable. It doesn't matter whether or not you, but no, any honest gun owner should know they're responsible for locking up that gun.
Like I said, unless the gun was locked up and they responsibly, and they somehow still got it. You know what I mean? Hell, I think that if you, it's just like if you leave your car running with your kid in it and walk away, and someone drives off with your kid in the car, that's kind of, I mean, you have some responsibility there. You know what I mean?
Exactly. But in the U.S., you have no responsibility with what somebody does. I mean, and there have been kids who have taken guns and gone undone. I think the Columbine kids, you know, the people that I think they got the guns from an uncle. No, just no culpability, and that's the NRA doing that. I mean, the NRA has made, and so here's what they do in Sweden. I think it may be Norway. You are required to have a semi-automatic rifle in your home. They give it to you. If you say no, there's a possibility you're going to go to jail. They pay for it. The reason is because that's their military. That is the that is how they plan to defend themselves if the Germans attack again or if anything else like that happens. And what they do is there's a ballistics profile on every one of those weapons. So if one of those weapons is used in a crime, within 4 hours, they know whose gun that is, and they're knocking on that person's door.
I'm good
Try
with
to
this.
suggest that. Yeah, but right now I'm not arguing with you as much as with Second Amendment guys who say, no, that's an infringement. Well, they take a look. These people who arm their citizens to the teeth, they give them the weapons, the ammunition, the whole 9 yards for free, sit there and look at us and say we're insane. They think we're fucking insane, and they're right.
Well, here's the thing: if you really think that you want to protect your country from tyranny, what would put any president on the back foot about even thinking about turning tyrannical if the entire country you knew was armed to the teeth and ready to respond? You know what I'm saying? Like,
I do, but I think that fails to take into account the fact that okay, imagine if Antifa all had that kind of access to that kind of weaponry, and if they were getting just a little more radicalized. So I think there is a flip side to that coin. So what I do is I look at countries like Australia, countries like England, countries where they've successfully, and I think it's a cost benefit, or not a cost, I think it's utilitarian calculation over what's the likelihood. I mean, we have 40,000 gun deaths a year in this country. Japan has less than 7. And if you take a look at all the lives that are saved over the period of 50 years, and I think that's a little early to say how, I mean, a lot of these countries have banned their guns for about 50 years, and they're not having fascism. If you look at the lives saved by that, and people say, well, what would the Jews have been able to do if they had guns? Well, it really depends on a large number of factors that we don't know. My guess is Hitler would have tried a different way, but if he wanted to do it, it would have succeeded the same thing. He just would have been much more indirect about it. And the fact of the matter is, many of them wouldn't have wanted to use violence anyway. And in a modern day, and I think you and I had this discussion, I think you make a good point, which is it would slow it down. It would absolutely slow it down. But again, what's the cost of the last 100 years, or not 100, but let's say 50 years of gun deaths versus a military that can send in a drone?
I think you're thinking two numbers, though. Here's the thing. If let me put myself in that position. Somebody comes from my family, they want to take my family, they want to kill my family, they want to do whatever to my family, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
The very fact that I got to fight is a comfort to me. Even
Okay,
if
but
it
if the
did no freaking good, the fact that I had
yeah.
a chance, the fact that even if I got to, all I got to do was pull my gun and shoot one motherfucker. You know what I mean? That is something of
Yeah.
a comfort to me. No, it really is.
Oh, I know it is. I'm sorry.
I mean, as a human being, just the idea that some part, even a small fraction of my fate might be in my hands, and it's not just roll through and cut me down like grass,
Yep.
that means a lot to me. And I think that means a lot to a lot of other I can only speak for Americans right now because that's kind of what the subject is. But I
Yeah.
think that's a very human thing to want just a tiny little bit of feeling like you have some mastery of your fate, even if it's an illusion. You know what I mean?
Well, and that makes sense to me, and I do have some agreement with that. But not only do I think it is an illusion, which is one reason why we need to try to guard against our own illusions, because it causes us to think poorly. And if somebody really wanted to come for you, they're going to come in the middle of the night when you're asleep, and you're not going to have that chance.
Mm-hmm.
But the other thing is, um, you have to weigh that with the fact that, yeah, if they come into your house, that's okay. And you may have some control and you may have some influence over your fate, even if it's not nearly as much as you'd like. But once you let your kids out the door and they go to school, now you don't. And if they're in a school where there's going to be a mass shooting, if
Oh
everybody else
yeah.
has a gun, including every psychopath, so you've gained some localized control, but you've lost a lot out in the. And this good guy with a gun versus bad guy with a gun scenario, it really bugs me, because while I agree very strongly that the only thing that stops a good guy with a gun is a bad guy with a gun, I completely agree. That's a straw man argument, as you know, because the argument that we're trying to make is, don't let the bad guys have the gun in the first place. I would rather the bad guy never get the gun than he gets the gun, shoots 4 people, and then he gets stopped. Now, so I'll let you, because I imagine you have something you want to say, and then I
Yeah,
will. I have a.
I've got a few. I still like my licensing idea
Yep. Yep.
because I think it does. One, it stems the flow of guns,
Yep.
and two, it does do its best to keep guns in the hands of safe, sane gun owners. The other thing that I was kind of wanting to get on too is that at every point of this, we are having to balance liberty and safety, right?
Yes.
And we have to, and both of these things are very important things. Both liberty and safety are incredibly important. So I don't think it's ever going to be a quick, easy answer of oh, this is the path forward, because just like with any other debate,
Oh,
even
Jesus.
things. What's that?
No, no, fuck. Okay, guys, I think we're going to wrap up the show. Ansgar has said there's no quick, easy answers. I think our audience was looking for quick, easy answers. It's 1:40 my time. I think we're done. Ansgar's giving it up. He doesn't want quick, easy answers. He thinks it's nuanced. So
Yeah.
I think we're done. I think show's over.
Oops. Yeah. I also think that one nerd versus brings up a fantastic point. By the way, our very first patron, which is freaking awesome.
Oh yes, yes, yes. And I wrote down his point because I was going to mention it too. But
Yeah.
please take it.
There is something very different about our country right now, and I can't put my finger on what it is, but there are a lot of disenfranchised, angry young men, and it spans it spans several different subcultures across our country, and
Yep.
and there is, I'm not sure that just taking away even if you Thanos snapped and all the guns were gone, there would still be this rash of angry young
Yes.
men ready to
Yes.
do violence right now.
Yes.
And you can see it all the way from, I mean, they're not using guns, thankfully, but all the way from Antifa to the Proud Boys, and in between, we've got incels, there just is an entire generation of disenfranchised, angry, violent young men in America right now that we're not necessarily seeing parallels in other countries. You know what I mean?
That's a very fair point, but that sort of, in my mind, goes to why we should really make sure that they can't get a hold of weapons. And I think I see. It also mentioned. I guess I have found another one. He had mentioned mentally ill, which that's the other thing. Which is we've been closing mental health hospitals. We have
We have.
now nixed Obamacare. And so not only, and people say, well, it's a mental health issue. Well, if you really believe that, then we should probably be addressing mental health, but we're not addressing that either.
No, we're
But
not.
even if, whether you believe it or not, it does seem to me that it's probably poor policy to be arming our mentally ill, which we are the only country in the world that does that. But we
Right.
really make, I mean, it doesn't, there's
I
no prohibition
definitely
on,
think
yeah,
I definitely think that my licensing laws that
yes.
I was discussing would definitely include at least a cursory
Oh, of course.
psychological evaluation. You know?
I would think, and to quickly finish what they do in Norway. So yeah, they have the ballistics profile of every single weapon. You have to have a license to trade or sell weapons, so that if you don't have your weapon, it's your fault and you've got a problem. They do a mental health profile of everybody before they give them the weapon, and if you fail that, you don't get it, and you get 6 weeks of training on safety and firearms usage.
Hmm.
And after all that, and each weapon is licensed to each individual and they know where they are, then you get your state issued killing device. But that's reasonable gun control, and seems to me would fit all of the requirements that the Second Amendment, pro Second Amendment people say they have.
Right.
But when you say, "Oh, we want a ballistics profile," they're like, "No, that's an infringement," which I really don't understand how that's. I
Well,
have
I do
no
have
clue
some
how that's an infringement.
very strong Second Amendment friends that have heard my my plan and are very for it. I think that my plan, if introduced, or a version of it that was more tightened up by other minds, because I don't think one person's mind is really equipped to come at this from every possible angle. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But but they've at least been very open to it. In fact, one person was coming up with all kinds of dumb excuses for why it doesn't work. Well, what if you want a gun in the dresser? Well, you know what they have? They have trigger locks. And if that's not fast enough for you, they literally have a trigger lock where you put your finger on the thing. It reads your fingerprint, and it drops off the gun in less than a second. If that is not
Jesus.
enough time to get access to your locked firearm, you were fucked anyway. Sorry, you just were.
I think that's true. And by the way, I like your plan. It's the most reasonable plan I've heard. I think so far on this, except for mine. And but we hadn't discussed your plan much. You had sort of vaguely. So
Yeah.
I didn't. I think it's worth considering and thinking about, and I like it. And like I said, I'm actually even for. I would be for giving out handguns for free, or not handguns, rifles, assault rifles for
Right.
free, if we did it the right way, and there's a proven way to do it. But there is also a proven way to get rid of all the guns, which is another one where I'm just sitting there going, and if we decide we don't want to and we want to, okay, but let's do proven methods. There are proven methods for both that work, and we know.
I have fears of taking all the guns.
Yeah.
And the reason I have fears is because I think that this president, like no other, yes, I'm going to be anti-Trump for some of you in the audience
Oh
here.
Jesus! Oh, what a hypocrite
What
for
a
someone who voted for him. All right.
you son of a bitch. Oh man.
He did. He voted for him. He denies it. I've never heard him admit it, and I don't have any proof, but my gut tells me he did.
Oh man, how many times have I been called a Trump voter online, and an SJW, and all kinds of other horrible things? It's hilarious.
I've been called a Trump voter too. I was like, have you gone to my YouTube page and listened to the highlighted thing?
Yeah.
I have a couple of objections. Anyways, I cut you off. I apologize.
Oh no. I don't even remember where the. Oh yeah. Oh, anti-Trump. So no, but I've seen for the first time in my life a president who skirts dangerously close to wanting a totalitarian state. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And he wants to have this sort of a blanket system where he can just take guns without any due process, completely arbitrary. And we've already
Which one?
seen that he wants to have ironclad control over over the justice system. So if you add all that up, and I know this sounds like really fucking alarmist, but you
Oh, it
add all
doesn't.
that crap up, you could literally have a president who says, "Okay, let's take away this group is anti me. We're gonna call that a red flag. Take all their guns." Now you get to a point where everybody's disarmed except for the military that's loyal to him. That freaks my mind out. You're a from within the system guy. I'm a more of a fuck
A
the
bit more,
system
yes.
guy, and that kind of thing that sends red flags to me. You know what I mean?
Yep.
Trump and plus Trump in Trump's how about this? Trump in Trump's ultimate fantasy version of himself as
Oh,
president,
yeah.
plus no guns, is a terrifying scenario.
I will say I wrote an essay that was a demagogue, a plausible path to the end of the American Republic, which was how Trump could first by attacking the Fifth Estate, undermining that, then by installing enough Supreme Court justices and helping to encourage Republican governors to successfully gerrymander districts in order to stack the House of Representatives in particular,
Mm.
but also the Senate, how he could literally undo the entire republic. And I said it would probably take about 8 years, but I thought he could. And it's scary because I mentioned it in a live stream earlier, and I started reading it, and I was like, I forgot I had said this. Oh, shoot, he's already done this one. Like, oh, he's done this one. Oh, he's done this one. Oh, he's already started talking about enemies of the state and how the military, not the military, the media is an enemy. How people who, and he wants to. What did he say about Democrats being? Oh, the Democrats are not shouldn't be allowed to vote. And he was
Yeah.
basically serious about that. But so I think there's some good. I think you bring up some good points.
I've got a couple. We did get a super chat from
Oh, beautiful.
Reed Chardonnay. I don't know how to pronounce that. Reed Chardonnay says, "Just because you guys rock, $10. Thank you, thank you very
Oh,
much."
dude, those are the kind that that really that makes my
That's
day.
fantastic.
Thank you.
We've also got. I want to address this. If you
Yeah.
could go back in time before an accidental shooting and ask that gun owner if they were safe and responsible gun owner, what they'd say. Well, the thing is with a system, it doesn't matter what they'd say. It's about track records. It's about
Yeah.
keeping accurate records. People's driving records tell us more about whether or not they're a safe driver than what they tell us. You know what I mean?
And right now, just to be fair, there's roughly the same number of highway deaths in this country as there are deaths by gun.
Mm-hmm.
And I think those numbers can mean different things, but just to be, I mean, that's roughly the same. Right now, it's easier to get a gun it is easier because of the gun show loophole. Anyone can get a gun faster than they can get a license to get a car. I
Yeah.
shit you not.
And that's a problem. And see, both a car and a gun are valuable tools in my mind, but intensely dangerous. In fact, I think that we're too lax on giving people's driving licenses. I really
I think,
do. I think we need to
yeah.
be more strict on those driving tests. And I think that we need to be more strict on who we allow any kind of dangerous tool. You know what I mean? I just do, and that includes guns. That includes cars. We've got to be strict, and I also see the ludicrous side of all of this. When you look at London, where now they're even wanting to ban things like kitchen knives. You know what I
Yeah, I
mean?
heard. Yeah, yeah.
It-
Dude. We gotta stop coming up with topics for shows. It's like already I've thought of like 6 topics for shows. I was like, oh, we gotta do a show on that. Oh my
and
god.
Reed Charbonneau just became a patron.
Oh my god.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. We are. Oh, we are. Thank you. I got to tell you, we've really enjoyed doing this. I think it's very hard to express how much we've enjoyed doing this. But there are some long days, there are some tired days, and to get positive feedback like that and I know for a fact I speak for Ansgar on that, but
Yes.
it really means a lot. So thank you.
It's actually touching. It really is.
Yep.
Seriously.
Yep.
I do also want to address one of the straw man arguments. I just say straw man. It's not really accurately a straw man. I think it's a bad argument that I see all the time from the
Oh,
from the ban the guns side of things.
perfect. So let's do this. How about we hear that argument, and then what
Okay.
I'd like to do is get into the Second Amendment because we are going to be running short on time. I'd like to just cover
Absolutely.
some basic Second Amendment stuff, and then we have a chat group that's actually open to anyone. You need an invite, but that's only because of the way Twitter works. And it's open to anyone, and it was for the after show, which are you going to be doing an after show?
Yes, I'm going to be doing an after show.
All right, so please, everyone, come to the after show. It's going to be on Ansgar's channel. He's also going to link it here.
It's in the description.
Okay,
right
it's
now.
not on the GDC, but
Okay.
what I would like to do is, I think we may have also gotten another super chat, so we got a couple things to do in line. But what I'd also like to get to is a couple of them started sharing personal stories, and I said we would air
Okay.
those. So let's why don't you do your thing? We'll hit the super chat, and then actually maybe do those stories first, and then quickly the Second Amendment. So what were you going to say?
Okay. No super chat. That's just the thing coming through telling us that we got the patron.
Okay.
So we're good with that. Okay, I was gonna say a lot of the things I hear I hear all the time is if there is, a we're going to rebel against the government moment that we would easily lose because they got the tanks and the planes and the blah 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 blah. It
Yep.
ignores a couple things. First of all, protracted fights against a occupying force have been overwhelmingly successful throughout history, at the very least in crippling governments. Secondly, it ignores the fact that the military are the people. Not everyone is going to instantaneously go, oh, yes, I'm going to take my orders and kill my fellow Americans. Now, some of them will. We don't know how many will. So I don't think that that is necessarily the most valid argument. And the last thing is also, remember the guy snuck into an army base, stole a tank, and went on a rampage in,
Yeah, I do.
in San Diego.
I do.
So
that was a sad story, but it
Yes.
was like I'm sorry. Every time I hear that one, I just have to imagine the first officer to call that in. Yeah, I have a vehicle which I suspect isn't licensed. Okay, make and model. Abrams tank.
right.
I was like, okay, no, Officer Johnson, how much have you been smoking this evening? What have you been drinking? No, there's a tank. It's on Route 117. I think we should deal with this somehow.
All right, I'm getting rid of this Roban guy if you don't mind. He says most of the big mass shootings are staged. He's got nothing interesting to say. I put him on timeout several times.
Gone.
Yeah.
Gone. You know what? To tell you the truth, probably under a very set of we're not going to do a dumpster fire, and we're not going to put on people who that's either just looking for attention or it's insane. At one point, if I find someone who I think really for some reason believes that they bought too much into what's his name, Jones.
Alex Jones,
Alex Jones, who is a certifiable fake, and he's been caught
Yes.
on camera saying he is a fake. There are people who believe him, but he's making money off of faking these, the school shooting. Sandy Hook was not a fake. It just wasn't. Even he admits that, but he makes money off of, and someday maybe we'll discuss it with people like that. But for now, thank you, Ansgar. They're gone.
No problem.
I think we did get a second super chat. Interesting person. I don't know.
Oh yes, let's look at that. Is Sandring person? I would love to discuss the guns issue with you. I'm a strong supporter of gun ownership and gun ownership rights. And remember, at a time when the number of guns has been increasing, the gun homicide rate has been nearly cut in half since the mid-90s. So they're saying, since the mid-90s, gun ownership has been rising and violent crime is going down. There is an interesting thing to say about that, yeah. And if you want to come to the after party, interesting person, I would be glad to just DM at Ansgar, I believe at Ansgar T. Odinson. My links are in the description. Just DM me and I will make sure that you get into the after party. I'd like to hear what you have to say.
And I'm trying to find. Actually, I've been having a number of conversations. So I think, oh, there it is, the after dark scheduling. Yeah, I think no, there's some truth to that, but the number of deaths by handguns are going up, and that's what we're trying to stop. Crime is an issue, but I think they're related. But just because crime has gone down doesn't mean the number of deaths by handguns have gone down. In fact, it's gone up and quite considerably. And I got objections to multiple things too. The NRA is its own issue. I mean, the NRA is a serious problem, and here's why: they deliberately subvert. So the CDC just wants to study this. Why? Because it's their job to study all causes of death in this country. That's their fucking job. And the NRA has successfully been able to defund through Congress, through super PACs, been able to get congressmen to defund any attempt to try to understand where this violence is coming from and how to fix it. And they finally got it too, where even if the CDC is able to get funds from another source, they are not allowed to publish results relating to guns that might be interpreted in a political way. That means that they cannot say we recommend licensing or we recommend
Right.
they can't do that legally, or they are in a whole heap. So they
dumb.
can't publish their results. They cannot publish. They've got results. They can't publish them. The FBI isn't allowed to track these figures. And this tells me one thing. This tells me the NRA knows exactly what is going to come back if that data comes out. There's only
Of
one reason to
course.
stop the data, and that's that they know what it is. That means that they are disingenuous. That means that, frankly, as far as I'm concerned, and I issued a challenge to LaPierre saying that he was guilty at a minimum of negligent homicide. He has sued people for slander in the past, and I was like, listen, you want to sue me? Fine, we'll have that discussion in court. But I think that's a defensible
Yeah.
charge. What were we going to say?
I think we could do an entire show just on the NRA.
Oh, Jesus, yeah. All right, so I'm gonna. Do you want to cover one of these stories, and I can cover one, or how do you want to do this? We'll do the
Why don't
stories,
you
and then
go
we'll hit
ahead?
the.
You read these
That's
things so much better than I do.
Okay.
Please, in your lovely
Okay.
voice.
And my
read
love,
these
I
stories.
can use my sexy voice, which is probably not going to be appropriate. I somehow think that's not going to be appropriate for.
Probably not.
Yeah, as I look at these stories, I was like, I think I probably shouldn't do that. Okay, so we had two people, and they're actually both friends of the show. We know both these people. We know them well, and I didn't know this history about either of them. I don't know about you, but I did not.
No, I didn't.
One said, my father-in-law. Her father-in-law had accidentally discharged his rifle in the house, not once but twice. But she actually had a whole bunch of stories of near misses. But one of the things she said was in the early 1970s, my great uncle was clinically depressed, and in a suicidal evening drove to every family member he could find to borrow a gun. The family called the cops on him, but before they could find him, he drove into a Long's drugstore, purchased a shotgun, got into his truck, and blew his brains out in the parking lot. Now, one of the reasons I think that's an important story is because a lot of pro Second Amendment advocates make fun of the fact that 2/3 of the gun deaths are suicide. They say, oh, it doesn't count, it's suicide. It absolutely does count. It doesn't count 100%, I will admit, because a percentage of those would have committed suicide anyway, that have found a way to do it. You can't sit there and say that it's all the gun's fault. But the fact of the matter is, most people do have brief suicidal ideation at some point in their lives. If a gun is easily available, they could get to it before they can change their mind, and then they do something that you can't take back. And the reality is the number of suicides drop in countries that don't have guns because the availability isn't there, and they think better of it before they can come up with another solution. And they think of hanging themselves, and they say, I don't like the idea. What if I change my mind while I'm out of oxygen? And the gun is a very different thing, and that's why you're 3 times more likely to kill yourself if you have a gun. You're not 3 times more depressed. There's the same number of depressed people, but you're 3 times more likely to kill yourself if you've got a gun.
And I would like to point out that's
Yes.
especially true for young men. Women tend to choose different ways out when they commit suicide.
A very good point. I think women in general, yeah, they do. They choose other methods, and I think that's an excellent point. And we had another one. Let's see. This woman, her neighbor, had to be taken and hidden by the police because his niece had murdered her parents, and he was next. And she was stalking him with a gun. She 2 doors down in another house, the husband tried to kill his brother and shot up the house and hunted him down on the street. Now, you know what? These are individual, not isolated. They're individual
Yeah.
incidents, and you can't draw a huge picture all of
No,
this.
of
But
course not.
we didn't ask for these stories, and just by putting these stories are coming in.
Mhm.
Anyone who says there isn't a problem and that this current path is sustainable is either insane or has some kind of agenda, because that's not, and even Ansgar, who's got this huge right-wing agenda when it comes to guns. I mean, holy smoke.
I want to put
He
guns in the hands of 2-year-olds.
Well, no, what you want to do is you want to put guns in the hands of people who you know are sane and have a good history and who have been vetted and who have been like, who I don't even know who you are.
You know, one nerd versus brings up a very good point.
Yep.
That violent crime and poverty are they are linked, and we
Jesus,
have
yes.
a serious issue with mass poverty in this country. Another way that we could probably prevent a ton of gun deaths, especially when you consider that gangs are one of the, gang violence is one of the number one causes of gun death. And we're talking after suicide, of course. And then we're talking, most of that gang violence is driven by extreme poverty.
Well, let's just give all the good guys with a gun, give all the good guys guns, and I'm sure the gangs will be fine.
Because that's worked so far.
That'll work great. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. So let's hit the Second Amendment, and then I think we're
All right.
I mean,
Yeah.
we could do this for a while. All right. Because I have a couple of complaints about this. The pertinent part reads, a well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state. The right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Now, the argument I always use with this is nobody knows what any of those words mean. And I get a phenomenal amount of pushback on this. I will start with just a real simple one. What's a person? What's a person? The Congress had to step in on whether or not Terry Schiavo was a person, and she was declared legally brain dead. And they couldn't decide whether she's a person or not. When this was written, a person was any white male 12 years old or older. That's it. A white male 12-year-olds or older. Women, not a person. They're just not a person in a
And
legal
now
sense.
corporations are people when considering campaign contributions.
Yep. Blacks were also not a person. So do we consider what they thought was a person when they wrote it, or what is considered a person now, which, by the way, is also still flexible? It's not an easy answer, but nobody really knows what a person is, and we're still trying to argue that. Now, not to suggest we should be arming fetuses, but one of the most current, I know I'm extreme, but one of the current arguments is a fetus a person? And we don't know.
Don't want to arm fetuses? What the hell is wrong with you,
yeah,
SJW
I know.
commie fuck?
I know, exactly. Well, well, actually, no, I don't mind doing it. It's just, in my mind, a logistics problem. Like, can the baby reach the unborn fetus? Can he reach the safety?
No. We have to cybernetically attach rocket launchers to all fetuses. And that's
okay. No, good. I like that one. That's a good plan. Let's do that. I think that's going to be our official. Good.
Yeah.
That's our official stance now. Rocket armed fetuses. Can you draw up the graphics on that, and we will have a fetus with a rocket launcher in time. Proudly supports. We'll talk about it after show. Okay. So let's see. Now the person's the easiest one. What is a right? So a right. Yeah, I touched on this briefly. A right technically is something that can't be taken away, but we do take away all sorts of rights all the time. The right to vote is one of the most sacrosanct rights in this country, but if you've committed a crime, many states will not allow, if you're an ex-con, an ex-felon, you have lost the right to vote, and you have that stripped from you. Now, I do disagree with that, but the fact that there's this notion that we can do that suggests to me that this idea that a right is what some people think is a right just isn't true. And in fact, many of the people who think that ex-cons shouldn't have the right to vote are also the ones who say guns are a right and nobody can infringe in the slightest. Well, wait a minute.
Kind of makes that whole inalienable thing not really stand, does it?
Yeah, that's kind of like what it sounds like to me.
Yeah.
So, what is a right? Is this should the mentally ill, proven, demonstrated mentally ill, someone who's truly psychotic and cannot tell the difference between their next door neighbor and an alien invasion? Should their rights to have a gun still be inalienable?
Right.
I have concerns.
Or do we consider them not a person?
Oh, let's do that. So the mentally ill. Okay. Oh, I like where we're headed with this. Mentally ill are not people.
There we go.
Done. Done. That's
Done.
probably so we killed two birds with one stone. We are efficient on this show. This is the
elect
right of
us.
efficiency.
Elect us.
Yep.
We're the
Yeah.
next. We're the next candidates. We're running on a third-party ticket. We got this.
Chair and hat.
20.
All right.
Yeah.
Yep. What's an arm? What's an arm? Now that's a spectacular one because I get that one all the time too. That's obvious. Well, when this was written, arms were considered, for the intents and purposes of this, a musket-loaded rifle. A not musket-loaded. Jesus Christ. A barrel-loaded musket. A barrel-loaded musket. That was an arm. Nobody who wrote this thought of an AK-47, M16, any of these things. Now, if you want to sit there and say, well, even if they didn't think about it, that's okay. Okay, fine. But why then not? Why not a Soviet MIRV-6?
I'm not sure that one necessarily stands up because by that token, I could say that the founding fathers never thought of the internet. So let's shut down free speech.
That's a really good argument. Yeah, no, you got it. You got it. You got it. Okay, so we're going to arm. Wait. I got to write a list of this. We are going to shut down the internet because it's not protected by free speech. We're going to arm unborn infants with bazookas
because they're people.
With rocket launchers.
Wait a minute. If
and we're going to declare all
mentally
people, ill,
that
people.
justifies private armies.
I love it. I love it. Ooh. We are just doing. Is this what they call social engineering?
I think it is. I think that we are now constitutional scholars.
We are, and I think if we drop 100 IQ points each, would be almost as unqualified as Trump.
I'll get the 2x4.
Perfect. Thank you. Is that the same one you always use to bonk me whenever I?
Oh yeah, we'll
give advice. Yeah, that's the same one. Yeah, that's an effective one. I appreciate that one.
Here's the thing though: would swords be considered arms because sabers were used back then?
And they were considered arms back then, although not arms for this intents and purposes. But that's the thing. So there's a side arm.
Right.
What is a sword called? It's also another. I mean, there's nuclear arms. There's side arms. There's long arms. There's every class of weapon for the most part has the word arm in it. And the question is, what class of arms are we talking about? Nuclear arms presumably is not included, but they are a kind of arm. So. And the funny thing is, there are, in fact, long arms and rifles and other weapons, which the NRA actually agrees and says, no, we shouldn't do that. Okay, so when they say there should be no line, they're already violating that principle. They do have a line. There are some weapons that even they say, no, can someone have a Gatling gun? I don't understand what it is, except a difference in degree between that and a fully automatic rifle, Saturday Night Special AR.
I think some people should be allowed to have a Gatling gun, but under very specific licenses and only able to be shot in very specific places. No, think about it. Hold on.
No. Oh, no, I'm thinking about this. This is what you're going to get one, and then you're going to be like, Nick, you want to come over for dinner sometime?
Well, yeah, come shoot my Gatling gun. That isn't as sexy as it sounds.
Okay. Yeah.
No, but I mean, like, if you're running a business that all you do is license out guns to like Hollywood, or you want to in a safe area where you've got your own property, charge millionaires to come shoot a fucking Gatling gun under supervision, I don't give a shit.
Frankly, honestly, I would concur with that, and I do think you could grant special licenses. I don't think, I'm really talking about just sort of civilians. In general, if you have a business use for it, even if you are a civilian, you're not a company, but you've got a legit business use for it, I think there are absolutely exceptions that could be made.
Certainly.
But I think the question is, so again, what is an arm? And there's no clear agreement on that. And everybody I've talked to who's for the Second Amendment usually says, oh, it's clear and obvious, and most of them don't agree with each other. So I want to know why it's clear and obvious, but they can't agree with each other on it. The right of the people, so we discussed, right? What is an infringement? That's insane, because the idea that licensing is an infringement. The idea that just getting a ballistics profile of your weapon is an infringement. But there are those that argue that. Now, I don't.
To
And again,
bolster your argument, man, there was actually an article rather recently in a libertarian publication, right? We're
yep.
talking a full on, like, this is a mainstream libertarian publication that tried to make the argument that private citizens, should be allowed to own nuclear weapons. I'm not kidding you.
What planet was this on?
Ours, unfortunately.
Are there alternative planets I can live on?
Unfortunately not.
I don't want to live on this one.
Can we just shut the
don't wanna
stream
live
down
on this
here?
one.
I think we
Yeah,
can't go.
I'm thinking that. Just wait, that there's nowhere to go from here.
There's really nowhere to go from there. There really isn't.
I would like to point out, here we are, two people who are talking about handing rocket launchers to unborn infants, and somebody has finally found our limit. That's our line. We won't cross that one. How far do you have to go to hit our limit?
No, but this clearly shows that nobody agrees on what all these terms are.
No, and I appreciate that. No, I think to get serious again, no, I think that, and I have said before, does a Soviet MERV 6 count? And people said, no, Nick, you're being silly. And the fact is, there are people who legit argue that. I don't think. Obviously, I think that's insane, but there are people who honestly believe it. Just like there are people who honestly believe flat Earth. Not as many as who say it. Most flat Earthers are posed, but there are people who believe it. There are people who believe just about anything. So I don't know how you're going to, by fiat, declare that this is crystal clear to everybody. I see no evidence it's crystal clear to everybody, and a shit ton of evidence. Nobody can agree on it.
Yep.
But they have to have it clear to everybody so that they can just sit there and say, so they just sort of fiat declare that and to try to shut down the discussion, which is another way to shut down. And I think when we talk about cancel culture, that's another thing. And that is, we should probably, before we go, also mention, because you and I are going to be on a stream.
We're going to be on Steve McRae's channel tonight. When is that?
You're asking me?
Oh, Jesus. You're going to make me look it up?
You look it up. I'll finish one more thing with the Second Amendment. Well, I doubt it'll be one more thing, but I'm going to need to get going. So we're going to.
You go ahead and do that while I look up Steve McRae's
Perfect.
thing.
Yeah, I am so disorganized. If this show is going to rely on me for organization, let's refund the super chats, back it up, and call it because it is.
That's okay. I got your back, man.
Thank you. All right. Well-regulated militia. Well, also, we don't have a militia. We are not a militia-based military. We don't have one. Now, if we want to say that we should have a militia to secure the state from the government, we can argue that. But then the problem I have is, do we really think our government is so? This is usually people who are right-wing libertarians who sit there and say, this is the greatest country in all the world, but if I'm not armed, the people that I have freely elected will probably turn against me and enslave me and my family, if not outright murder us. I have a problem with that general line of thinking, which strikes me as that's roughly the argument that's being made. I did see someone here say a right to bear anthrax. Why not? Sure. We also had someone here who said they like Steve. Obviously, they've never met him. I'm just kidding.
Yeah. By the way, it says it's in 6 hours, so that looks like it's going to be at 5 o'clock my time. Yeah, 6 p.m. my time. Excuse me. Pacific 6 o'clock Pacific Standard Time, which would put that at 3 o'clock.
No,
Eastern.
9. That
Sorry,
would be 9 Eastern. But I think it's 8 Eastern. It's 8:30 Eastern. If I recall, it's 8:30 Eastern. But the idea was there's a window between 8:30 and 9 Eastern when it's going to start PM. So that's in about 6 hours. So Ansgar and I will both be there. And is that the one that was hosting the In Time show, or was that even another? Yes. All right. So
we're going as In Time.
We're going as In Time, so we'll be doing the shtick and giving everyone a hard time. Let's see, a well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of the free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms. What does it mean to keep? When you say keep, does that mean you can keep a Gatling gun on your person at all times, even when you go into a library, even when you go into a public school, even when you go into an airport, even when you go into Congress for the free what is a right to keep it? What is the right to bear it? If the right to keep and bear is not infringed, in my mind, what that means is you can carry the weapons at all times anywhere you want to. That is another ludicrous proposition in my mind. There have to be, I think the Secret Service is going to have an objection to you having an AR uh, 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 AR-17, AR. Well, I'm a little tired. Did you just kill my camera again? Yeah, you are doing this on. You are doing this on. Don't even go there.
Yeah, well, see, if I reload in the middle of your talking, they'll miss your lovely voice.
I appreciate you not doing that. So let me finish, and they just don't get to see me. Wait. I can pick my nose now.
You
What I'm
can.
gonna do. I'm gonna take off my coat. I'm gonna like maybe pick my nose, but I have a feeling that this is a trap. That really you can see me, but you got the screen dark there, so that as soon as I'm doing something compromising, they're like, "Oh, Nick, I fixed it!" Boom, and everybody can see it.
Damn it!
That is the kind of trust we have in this relationship, folks. Let's see. The right of people to keep and bear arms. We already infringe on that. We period infringe on that. We have violated the Second Amendment, and no one's got any problems with it. The question is then, what is the degree and how far are we willing to go? But anyone who says you cannot violate the Second Amendment under any set of circumstances, it's already been violated. They've already agreed to violating it. They've got no problem violating it. In fact, they think it should be violated. So it's just a question of degree. And so I do think it's a straw man argument when people sit there and say it's sacrosanct, you can't violate, not to mention the fact that we've already changed other amendments of the Constitution, including but not limited to the fact that Black men constitute only 3/5 of a human being. We've changed the Constitution. So there's a lot of straw man arguments, both in regards to the Second Amendment, I think in terms of the good guy with a gun, versus the bad guy with a gun, and I think we've only actually, I think, scratched the surface. But I hope this gives us sort of a basic premise of what I think are some of the very serious problems with it. And I think, Ansgar, you did come up with a very reasonable solution. And even if I'm not sure that that's what I would consider to be the best solution, I think that's at a minimum, I have zero doubt in my mind, it would be a huge positive start. And, that's the other thing, which is a lot of people say, well, we can't, sort of start in one direction because no, I mean, and if that's where we ended up, listen, if it worked, I really don't care. What I want is something that works. And it sounds like
all I did was get you to think a little differently about gun control, I think that I take that as a huge victory, even if you don't come to my opinion. You know what I mean?
Well, my wife says the same thing. Anytime she gets me to think about, really, quite frankly, anything, she considers that a huge victory. All right. So thank you all very much. This is another one of those. I think, we could really work. We may start scheduling these for 2 hours, but at least on some days that may not be doable. But I would like to take a moment to thank our new patron. I would like to thank those that donated the super chats. I don't know, Ansgar, is there anything else you can think of?
No. Thank you all for coming out. Thanks for all the new subscribers. Thanks for participating in chat. Thanks for talking to us. And thank you to everybody who had completely different opinions from us, contributing and giving us your thoughts and feedback, because this is a big thing that isn't going to be solved by just a couple people. This is going to require a ton of minds on this issue. It really is.
And let me remind you too, you can get in touch with either the channel, you can get in touch with Ansgar or myself on Twitter. And if you're interested in the after party, you can just show up to Ansgar's channel. That is in the description, at least on the In Time channel. It's not on the GDC. Again, I apologize. I will try to get to that, but I'm unfortunately a little bit behind the clock here, but I will try to do that. You can also just send a tweet or a DM to Ansgar. He can get you into the after show. Those are just a blast and a lot of fun. Go do that. And then we're also going to be, like we said, on Steve McRae's channel. I didn't realize it was quite his channel, but if you follow either of us, we will be retweeting where we're going to be later tonight. And then next Tuesday, our topic is, if I recall correctly, and Ansgar can correct me if I'm wrong, we're going to have Inane Dragon on to discuss polyamory. open marriages and the death of the modern marriage.
Mm-hmm.
So thank you all very much for coming, and we look forward to seeing you tonight at the after show and then again on Tuesday. Thank you.
See you later.